I have a William Goldman quote here, and one of his quotes reads, "Screenplays are structure, and that's all they are." So do you agree with this quote? And why do you think so many screenwriters argue about structure?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's hard to not agree with William Goldman, who is arguably the dean of contemporary American screenwriters. I mean, an amazing legacy, and I never met him, but I know people who have and just said that he was just the greatest guy. And so the idea that screenplays are structure, there's a very real way in which that's true, I think. Ultimately, a screenplay is a pre-movie. It's a template and a guide to make a movie. And so there is a structural component just like that, where it gets budgeted and they do everything that they have to do in terms of the pre-production and production. From a writing standpoint, it's also true because beginning, middle, and end, and subplots and all that stuff too. Why people argue about it? I think that a lot of it is people want or are inclined to think about screenplays at a surface level, like page counts and act breaks and that sort of thing. Stylistic things, like you can't have any unfilmables or flashbacks or voiceover narration is weak writing, because that puts the conversation in a realm where it's pretty easy. And in reality, to write a great script, it's none of that. It's all about immersing yourself in the lives of your characters and seeing what emerges from that process. And that's not easy. And there is no golden parachute secret way of doing that. Characters are slippery, and many of them are hard to know. And figuring out the relationships and what they need and what they want and their conscious goal and unconscious goal, and examining their personal history, which is everything that's happened to them, to find out their backstory elements, which are the key elements that come forward into the story. That's hard work. And that requires trust and faith that the characters exist. And that's a conversation that people, I think, are afraid of. And so they'll argue about story structure. And I've seen this, flame wars. I wrote a series of blog articles on these so-called screenwriting rules. They want to talk about these rules. There are no rules. If there were rules, there would be rule books. There are conventions, there are expectations, there are even paradigms, but not rules. And so people want to reduce it to rules. They want to reduce it to formula. They want to reduce it to specific paradigms, to structure as plot. When structure is not just plot, there's the external world of action and dialogue, which I call the plot line. That's the realm of the physical journey. That's only half the story. There's the internal world. So where there's dialogue, there's subtext. And where there's action, there's intention. What are the characters' intentions behind their actions? And where there's the plot line, there's a theme line. So the plot line answers the question, what is the story about? The theme line answers the question, what does the story mean? And that's the psychological journey compared to the physical journey. And so that conversation that's constantly floating around, that's up there in that top realm, the plot line, structure as plot, you need to get down in that other part. That's where the conversation needs to be having. We need to be having that conversation. Moreover, as I said up front, I think that's where you start the conversation. That's your dialogue with the story, is with the characters. I don't care what paradigm they use. If they've started with the characters and immersed themselves in the lives of those characters, more often than not, they're going to come up with the story structure out of that, and those characters are going to be alive and vibrant. So again, the answer, I think, is that people are not comfortable with that sort of engagement with characters on an existential level where you believe they exist, and now I'm asking you to get inside their heads or talk to them or engage them in conversation. That's, I think, for many people, something that they feel uncomfortable with. If they can say, oh yeah, they need to have the the break into Act 2 on page 25, it can't be page 23, it can't be page 29, it's got to be 25. They're more comfortable with that because it makes it simpler, you know.
So are there no great writers, just great rewriters? And I'm not sure if that's a quote of yours. I think I found
No,
that.
it's their, you know, writing is rewriting. Yeah, that's probably more true of screenwriting than maybe any other narrative form, just because there's so many layers to get a movie made. There's you as the writer, and so you get feedback from your writer friends, you know, the writers group. If you're represented, you get feedback from your managers and sometimes your agents, depending upon, you know, what your relationship is with your agents. Then if you're working with a producer, you get feedback from the producer. And if you've got it set up at a studio or a production company or financier, you get feedback from them. Then if the thing gets greenlit, now you got actors and directors attached. Well, now you're going to have feedback from the director. You're going to have feedback from each of the individual actors. Sometimes they have their own writers, and then you have to then synthesize what the other writers have done to their characters. And so, for example, I know Eric Heiserer quite well, and he wrote Arrival, which is absolutely one of the, you know, all-time fantastic scripts. And I asked him, I said, how many drafts did you do? And he said 100. Now, most of those are like changing a line, you know, but he would codify each one just so he knew, you know, or dropping a scene or adding 2 scenes or whatever. So I think probably out of that maybe 10 or 15 drafts, you know. But yeah, you know, I tell my students, university students, when they've gone through all this work of developing a story, and then they sit down to write, you know, a draft of it, I say, okay, you just have to understand it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to rewrite it. And they go, oh, really? You know, they're not used to that. Talk to them 2-3 years later, they completely understand, you know. But yeah, writing is rewriting, yeah.